Humans were a curious anomaly among Deathworlders, a classification given to species originating from hostile and extreme planets. Deathworlders were known for their resilience and tenacity, yet among them, humans stood apart. They didn't just survive the adversity of their homeworld. They thrived with an uncanny blend of adaptability and creativity that often left the galaxy bewildered. This uniqueness wasn't just in their physiology but in their philosophy, an unmatched capacity for patience. Other Deathworlders responded to conflict with immediate and decisive action, often prioritizing brute force. Humans, however, approached these situations with careful diplomacy. Time and again, they demonstrated an almost unnerving ability to de-escalate tensions, negotiate compromises, and endure indignities that would provoke war among other species. The galactic community mistook this patience for passivity or weakness. Humanity, it seemed, could be pushed, tested, and exploited without ever retaliating. Their reputation spread far and wide as the negotiators. Stories abounded of humans brokering peace between warring factions, opening trade routes in disputed territories, and creating alliances that no one thought possible. It wasn't just their skill at negotiation, it was their steadfast refusal to resort to violence unless all other options had been exhausted. For centuries, this approach allowed humanity to avoid major conflicts, even as other species underestimated and belittled them. The galaxy, in its arrogance, saw humans as naive idealists. Other civilizations, hardened by millennia of conflict, could not fathom why humans would tolerate betrayals, insults, and aggressions without reprisal. Time and again, humans sought understanding rather than revenge. Treaties were broken, and humans returned to the negotiation table. Borders were violated, and they proposed shared oversight. Resources were stolen, and they responded with diplomatic overtures. For a galaxy steeped in cycles of retaliation and conquest, such behavior was incomprehensible. But there were those who observed humanity more closely, recognizing the subtle danger beneath their patience. Human historians and scholars warned that patience had its limits. They understood their people's capacity for calculated action once provoked. Writings from human thinkers reflected a chilling understanding: when humans decided enough was enough, their response would not be reactionary or emotional, it would be deliberate, overwhelming, and final. This warning, however, was largely ignored. To many in the galactic community, humans were an endless well of forgiveness and tolerance, perpetually willing to absorb losses for the sake of maintaining peace. Their efforts were often met with condescension. "They're too soft to survive," some species said. "Push them hard enough, and they'll fold." For generations, humanity's patience was exploited as an unspoken resource, something that others could take without consequence. Yet, in the background of these dismissive attitudes, cracks in the facade began to form. Subtle shifts in human behavior emerged as they faced an increasing number of challenges. Their diplomats became less accommodating, their tone more resolute. Quietly, humanity began preparing for what they hoped would never come, a day when their patience would no longer be enough to protect them. This slow transformation wasn't widely noticed. The galaxy, comfortable in its assumptions, failed to grasp the significance of humanity's preparations. In their ignorance, they overlooked one vital truth about humans: their patience was not an endless resource. It was a choice, rooted in their history, values, and hope for a better future. And like all choices, it could be revoked. As the galaxy would soon learn, the breaking point was not a question of if, it was a question of when. Humanity's breaking point came not as a sudden eruption but as a carefully forged response to a singular betrayal. Over centuries, humans had endured provocations with patience that baffled and frustrated the galaxy. However, their limits were not infinite, and one event crystallized the realization that their tolerance could no longer be sustained. The inciting incident was an act of aggression so brazen that even the most diplomatic human leaders were left with no room for interpretation. A coalition of dominant species, emboldened by years of exploiting humanity's perceived leniency, executed a coordinated attack on human colonies. This was not an isolated skirmish or border dispute. It was a deliberate assault on key settlements, targeting civilians and vital infrastructure. Entire cities were razed, and millions of lives were lost in what would later be described as a calculated attempt to force humanity into submission. Despite the devastation, humanity's initial response was characteristic of their nature. Their leaders sought justice through the proper channels, presenting evidence to the Galactic Council and calling for sanctions against the aggressors. They believed, as they always had, in the principles of diplomacy and collective accountability. However, the Council's response was indifferent, dismissive even. The aggressors, powerful in their influence and alliances, faced no repercussions. To the galaxy, this was business as usual, a cycle of power politics where the weak endured the whims of the strong. This dismissal was the final insult. For humanity, it was no longer about the loss of life or territory. It was about the fundamental betrayal of the principles they had upheld for so long. They had always played by the rules, believing in fairness and mutual respect, only to discover that those rules were a farce designed to protect the powerful. The message was clear: patience and integrity had no place in a galaxy governed by exploitation and apathy. What followed was a silence that unsettled even the most cynical observers. Humanity ceased all diplomatic efforts, withdrawing from intergalactic discussions and severing communication with their allies. Their ships vanished from trade routes, their emissaries left foreign capitals, and their presence on the Galactic Council was reduced to a single, haunting statement: "You will hear from us when the time comes." This withdrawal was not an act of surrender but a harbinger of something far more profound. While the galaxy speculated about humanity's next move, the humans themselves were preparing. For decades, they had been quietly developing technologies and strategies that would enable them to defend their interests without relying on the goodwill of others. Their patience had always been underpinned by a keen awareness of their vulnerability, and they had used that time to ensure that if the day ever came when patience was no longer an option, they would be ready. The first sign of this readiness came in the form of precision strikes against the aggressors' military assets. These were not acts of vengeance but calculated demonstrations of capability. Entire fleets were neutralized without a single human casualty, and critical infrastructure was rendered inoperable within hours. The aggressors, accustomed to wielding power without consequence, found themselves disarmed and exposed. What shocked the galaxy even more than humanity's efficiency was their restraint. Despite their losses, humans did not seek to annihilate their enemies. Instead, they demanded reparations, territorial concessions, and binding agreements to prevent future aggression. These terms were enforced not through negotiations but through the implicit understanding that any further defiance would result in total eradication. For the first time, the galaxy understood the duality of humanity's nature. Their patience had not been a weakness but a choice, and their decision to abandon it was not made lightly. The breaking point was not an act of rage, but a calculated response to a world that had shown them no respect. The aggressors, once so confident in their dominance, were left with no illusions about their position. Humanity's actions reverberated far beyond the immediate conflict. Their display of power forced every species to reconsider their assumptions about human nature. The Galactic Council, which had dismissed their earlier pleas, scrambled to rebuild its credibility, hastily passing resolutions to address the systemic inequities that had led to the crisis. Former allies of the aggressors distanced themselves, fearing retaliation, while neutral species sought to establish diplomatic ties with humanity, eager to avoid becoming their next target. The lesson was clear: patience should never be mistaken for passivity, and underestimating those who practice it is a grave mistake. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it truly meant to endure, and what could happen when that endurance was no longer extended. Humanity's transformation after the breaking point was immediate and profound. They discarded the diplomacy-first approach that had defined them for centuries, replacing it with a strategic assertiveness that left no room for ambiguity. Their actions became a masterclass in calculated power projection, aimed not at conquest but at securing their place in the galactic order. The first priority was rethinking their approach to defense and retaliation. Humanity had long invested in technology, but now they redirected their focus entirely. They developed systems that prioritize precision, scalability, and psychological impact. Their fleets were no longer designed for deterrence alone. They became instruments of decisive action, capable of neutralizing threats with surgical efficiency. Advanced artificial intelligence, adaptive weapons systems, and resilient infrastructure became cornerstones of their strategy, ensuring they could respond to any challenge without overextending themselves. Humanity's shift wasn't limited to military advancements. Their economic policies underwent a similar overhaul. They abandoned reliance on galactic trade networks that had often exploited their resources and vulnerabilities. Instead, they developed self-sustaining systems that reduced their dependency on external powers. Simultaneously, they forged selective alliances with species that had previously been marginalized, creating new trade routes and mutual defense pacts. These partnerships were based on equality and mutual benefit, contrasting sharply with the exploitative relationships that had dominated the galaxy for so long. What set humanity apart was their ability to maintain restraint even as they wielded newfound power. They did not become aggressors or conquerors. Every action they took was measured and purposeful, designed to achieve specific goals without unnecessary collateral damage. Their approach demonstrated an almost unnerving clarity of purpose. Humanity would no longer tolerate threats, but they would not seek conflict for its own sake. This restraint amplified their influence, as it became clear that their actions were driven by principle rather than ambition. The galaxy's response to humanity's transformation was a mixture of awe, fear, and respect. Former aggressors, once confident in their ability to dominate, now scrambled to reconcile with humanity, offering reparations and guarantees of non-aggression. Neutral species, many of whom had previously viewed humans with suspicion or disdain, sought alliances, recognizing that humanity's new approach offered both security and opportunity. Even the most powerful factions in the galaxy, those who had long dictated the terms of interstellar politics, found themselves recalibrating their strategies to account for humanity's influence. Perhaps the most striking aspect of humanity's transformation was their ability to reshape the galactic narrative. Where they had once been seen as overly forgiving or weak, they were now regarded as exemplars of strength tempered by wisdom. Their ability to endure injustice without losing sight of their principles became a source of inspiration for many species, particularly those who had suffered under similar systems of exploitation. Stories of humanity's resilience and strategic acumen spread across the galaxy, reshaping perceptions and fostering a new era of interstellar cooperation. At the same time, humanity's transformation sparked introspection within their own ranks. The decision to abandon patience had not come without cost, and the moral implications of their actions weighed heavily on them. Debates about the ethics of their newfound assertiveness permeated human society, with some questioning whether they had compromised their values in the pursuit of security. These discussions, far from weakening their resolve, became a driving force for self-improvement, as humanity sought to balance strength with compassion in a galaxy that had shown little of either. Their internal debates also influenced their external policies. Humanity became vocal advocates for systemic reform within the Galactic Council, using their newfound leverage to push for changes that would prevent future conflicts. They demanded accountability, transparency, and equity, challenging the entrenched power structures that had enabled their exploitation. Their efforts were met with resistance, but their determination, coupled with their ability to enforce consequences, ensured that progress was made. Through these actions, humanity demonstrated that their transformation was not just about survival. It was about creating a galaxy where no species would have to endure what they had. Their resilience and adaptability, once dismissed as mere survival traits, became the foundation for a new era of interstellar relations. Humanity had not just changed themselves, they had changed the galaxy. The memory of their breaking point served as a reminder of what could happen when patience was taken for granted. For humanity, it was a painful but necessary lesson. For the galaxy, it was a warning. The balance of power had shifted, and with it came a new understanding of what it meant to coexist in a universe that was often unforgiving. Humanity had proven that strength and patience were not mutually exclusive, and that underestimating either was a mistake no one would make again. The aftermath of humanity's transformation reshaped the galactic order in ways no one had anticipated. The immediate consequences were felt most acutely by the aggressors who had provoked humanity's breaking point. Their once dominant position was reduced to ashes, militarily crippled, politically isolated, and economically devastated. They were forced into agreements that ensured reparations and compliance, agreements upheld not by trust but by the knowledge that any breach would invite swift and absolute consequences. Beyond the aggressors, the entire galaxy adjusted its perception of humanity. What had once been seen as a species defined by patience and diplomacy was now understood as a force capable of reshaping interstellar norms. This transformation carried both fear and admiration. To some, humanity was the ultimate deterrent, a reminder that even the most forgiving could become the most formidable. To others, they became a symbol of resilience and justice, inspiring weaker species to challenge the status quo. Humanity's actions set off a ripple effect, forcing introspection across the galaxy. Marginalized species, long subject to exploitation, began asserting their rights, emboldened by humanity's example. Coalitions formed among these species, supported by humanity's resources and strategic guidance. This new balance of power disrupted the entrenched hierarchies that had dominated for millennia, shifting the galaxy toward a more equitable, albeit unstable, state. For humanity, the breaking point became a pivotal moment of self-discovery. It was not a victory celebrated with pride but one marked by solemn reflection. The decision to abandon their long-held principles of diplomacy weighed heavily on them. While their actions had secured their survival and established their influence, they questioned whether the cost, both moral and emotional, was too great. This introspection shaped their policies moving forward, driving them to find ways to lead without losing the core values that had defined them. One of humanity's first initiatives in the aftermath was to push for reforms within the Galactic Council. Once a symbol of complacency and corruption, the Council became the target of humanity's relentless advocacy for accountability. They proposed sweeping changes, including the establishment of independent oversight bodies, the redistribution of power among member species, and the creation of a unified code of interstellar law that applied equally to all. These proposals faced resistance from entrenched powers, but humanity's influence ensured that progress was made. At the same time, humanity took steps to rebuild trust with those who had been neutral or uninvolved in the conflict. They extended their hand in partnership, offering aid, technology, and security guarantees to species that had suffered under the same system that had exploited humanity. This approach wasn't entirely altruistic. It was also a calculated effort to solidify alliances and prevent future isolation. Yet, the sincerity of their actions earned them respect and loyalty from many quarters. The cultural impact of humanity's transformation was equally profound. Across the galaxy, stories about humanity's breaking point became the stuff of legend. These tales were told in various forms, some depicting humans as avenging angels, others as cautionary figures whose patience had been stretched too far. The narrative served as both inspiration and warning, a reminder that even the most tolerant species could reach a limit when pushed too hard. Within human society, the legacy of the breaking point was a complex one. It became a defining chapter in their history, taught in schools and debated in forums. Some viewed it as a necessary evolution, a moment when humanity finally stood up for itself and claimed its rightful place in the galaxy. Others saw it as a tragic departure from the ideals that had once made them unique. This internal debate fueled a new era of philosophical and ethical inquiry, as humanity grappled with questions about the balance between power and principle. Despite these challenges, humanity emerged as a leader in the galactic community. Their ability to navigate complex power dynamics while remaining committed to reform earned them a unique position of authority. They did not seek to dominate but to guide, using their influence to promote stability and cooperation. This approach resonated with many species, who saw in humanity a rare combination of strength and restraint. The lessons of the breaking point reverberated across generations. For humanity, it served as a reminder of their capacity for both endurance and action, a duality that defined their place in the galaxy. For the other species, it was a stark warning about the consequences of underestimating patience. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and the galaxy would never again view humanity as anything less than a force to be reckoned with. Humanity's role in the galaxy after the breaking point became a defining chapter not just in their own history but in the shared history of interstellar civilization. The transformation they underwent set in motion a new era of accountability and awareness, reshaping how the galaxy viewed both power and diplomacy. The long-standing systems of exploitation and unchecked aggression were no longer sustainable in a world where humanity had demonstrated the consequences of taking patience for granted. The Galactic Council, once an emblem of stagnant bureaucracy, underwent significant changes largely driven by humanity's persistence. The reforms humanity championed reshaped its purpose from a tool of the dominant powers into a forum where all species could have a voice. These changes did not come easily. Resistance was fierce, especially from those who had benefited most from the old system. Yet, the weight of humanity's influence, and the example they had set forced even the most reluctant participants to adapt. The ripple effects extended to interstellar relations as a whole. The alliances humanity formed in the aftermath of their breaking point became the backbone of a new political order. These alliances were not based on coercion or dominance but on shared principles of mutual respect and collective security. Humanity's insistence on fair treatment and collaboration began to permeate the wider galactic culture, inspiring even those who had once viewed them with disdain. Economic shifts mirrored the political realignments. Humanity's decision to restructure their trade networks and prioritize self-sufficiency served as a wake-up call to other species. Dependence on exploitative systems was no longer seen as inevitable. Instead, there was a growing movement toward building sustainable and equitable economic partnerships. Humanity's success in this regard became a model for others, demonstrating that independence and interdependence could coexist in balance. Culturally, humanity's impact was equally profound. Stories of their patience, breaking point, and subsequent transformation became part of the collective mythology of the galaxy. These narratives were not merely cautionary tales. They carried lessons about resilience, justice, and the limits of tolerance. They also fostered a sense of unity among species who had previously seen themselves as disconnected or even adversarial. The shared recognition of humanity's actions created a common reference point, a reminder that even the most disparate civilizations could find common ground. Humanity's legacy was not without its complexities. Internally, debates about their transformation continued to shape their society. Some questioned whether the choices made during and after the breaking point had compromised their values, while others argued that those choices were a necessary evolution in a galaxy that had given them no alternative. This ongoing dialogue kept humanity grounded, ensuring that their power was wielded with care and introspection. Externally, their actions were met with a mixture of admiration and caution. While many species embraced humanity as a force for stability and reform, others remained wary, interpreting their influence as a potential threat. These tensions underscored the delicate balance humanity had to maintain. They could not afford to become the very thing they had fought against, an unchecked power imposing its will on others. Instead, they sought to lead by example, promoting a vision of coexistence where strength was tempered by responsibility. The breaking point itself became a touchstone for future generations. For humanity, it was a reminder of the importance of vigilance and the dangers of complacency. For the galaxy, it was a lesson in humility and the perils of underestimating those who choose patience over aggression. This shared understanding laid the foundation for a more stable and cooperative interstellar community, even as challenges and conflicts persisted. Ultimately, humanity's greatest achievement was not their military strength or political influence, but their ability to transform adversity into an opportunity for growth and reform. They had shown the galaxy that power, when used wisely, could be a force for positive change. Their journey from patience to action, from victims of exploitation to champions of equity, became an enduring example of what was possible when a species refused to accept the status quo. Humanity's story was no longer just their own. It was woven into the fabric of the galaxy, a testament to the strength of patience, the necessity of boundaries, and the transformative power of resilience. The breaking point had been their darkest hour, but it also became their finest moment, a turning point that redefined their place in the cosmos and set the stage for a future where no species would have to endure what they had.